As Good as Dead by C.J. Knight. Stormtrooper TX-8242 focused on the empty corridor of Deck 30 of the sub-maintenance corridor deep in the bowels of the abandoned Star Destroyer. He was one member of a team of 5, headed by Armitage. The other team was somewhere else inside the vessel, headed by Captain Sartoris. Their mission was simple enough. Their prison barge, the Purge, his current posting, suffered massive mechanical failure. It was now drifting 7 days out from their destination. Current position was unlikely to be located by a passing ship. Pure chance put them within reaching distance of the abandoned destroyer. They were dispatched to retrieve the parts required to make repairs on the Purge. It was now he found himself covering the rear, a position that suited TX-8242. He liked Armitage well enough, young but professional. It was the others he didn't care for. He glanced at Phoebes and Quartermass, and the other trooper, TX-6837. Their thoughts on Armitage were clear. He had heard them debate about the Purge's medical officer, Dr. Cody, and which parts of herself she washed in the shower first. It was Armitage's lack of participation in these conversations that drew ire and disrespect. It was suggested to Armitage on more than one occasion that if he felt that way about Dr. Cody's honour, perhaps he was better suited to join the rebellion. This was a sentiment TX-8242 disagreed with, and preferred his own company at the rear rather than join in. TX-8242 adjusted his hands around his E11 blaster. Due to the cramped confines of the corridor, he had the stock folded in. Not ideal. Especially in this place. It was the smell that he noticed first. He'd fought on worlds with twin suns, where the bodies rotted in the heat, marched through burning cities on Kashyyyk, and seen floodwaters logged with bloated corpses run on nameless outer rim moons. Troopers learned the smell of death. This destroyer was something different. The decay in the air held a sweet smell, with underlying hints of damp metal and ozone. The closest thing his brain could match to the smell, drifting around him like unseen fog, was nothing he'd witnessed in combat, but a smell from childhood. It was the smell of raw meat on a metal tray, left to rot. It was a smell his helmet filters struggled to compensate for, and left him wondering how bad it would be if he removed his helmet altogether. The other thing weighing on TX-8242 was the absence of crew. A destroyer this size functioned with a crew close to 10,000. Yet they'd traversed the vessel without seeing any signs of life. He was fully aware that the scanners hadn't detected more than a handful of survivors aboard. But seeing it now gave the sense of unease he felt before battle. TX-8242 turned toward the sound. A minor tremor in his foot signalled the adrenaline hit. Quartermass, Phoebes and the other trooper hurried along the corridor. The scream had come from Armitage. Quartermass turned and pushed past Phoebes and the other trooper. Rolling along the corridor came a twisted mass of rotting flesh, screaming and reaching forward in hunger. Faces of clicking jaws, torn, grey skin and protruding bone. Their eyes all held the same faded yellow glow. Fireflies of death swarming toward prey. The Imperial uniforms, armour, This was the crew of the Star Destroyer. TX-8242 pressed forward, blaster raised. No shot. The others were between him and the horde, blocking line of sight in the cramped corridor. Skeletal hands of the horde curled around Phoebes and dragged him backward. Quartermass and the other trooper worked to free him, pulling to get him back. A rotten jaw clamped down on Phoebes' throat. An arterial spray spewed along the corridor wall as the jaw ripped a chunk of flesh away. The horde folded over itself, fighting to bite Phoebes. Other hands dragged Quartermass and the trooper down. The trooper pulled a thermal detonator out. Dead hands tore the trooper's arm from the socket. The white armoured arm hit the ground, clutching the detonator. The fingers curled open, and the detonator rolled free. TX-8242 turned and sprinted away. The blast blew him off his feet, and he slammed into the dura metal of the corridor wall. He came to find the roof of the corridor collapsed behind him. They were still there, but he was safe for now.
Log, TX-8242. Contact loss with Armitage. Contact loss with Phoebes, Quartermass and TX-6837. Detonator discharge at Junction 4. Corridor collapsed. The rest of the party is either dead or dying, trapped with hostile entities. Current position, secondary maintenance conduit, Deck 30, close proximity to Research Sublab 12B. Internal O2, 44% dropping. Filter 4A damaged and thermal detonator blast. Imperial protocol is wait for extraction. Highly improbable. Unlikely that Sartoris and his team will perform extraction search. Star Destroyer tractor beam in operation. Suggested plan of action. Proceed toward the vessel's aft. Specifically Deck 18, Auxiliary Launch Base 6 Kappa, and utilise an escape pod. Log entry end.
The scratching that came from the rubble of the collapsed corridor roof was urgent as it was desperate. TX-8242 imagined the hands of the dead, clawing on the other side of the rubble. An endless sea of pale yellow eyes, searching for him, their next meal. In that moment, the trooper never felt so alone. There would be no rescue or extraction. He knew that. It made perfect sense. Why risk further assets to save a solitary stormtrooper? The fight to survive was going to be a battle he won or lost on his own. His plan to utilise an escape pod from the auxiliary launch bay remained the best option. Sheets of roof debris slid away from the rubble. Yellow eyes peered through the newly made gap. The jaws of the dead opened in macabre grins. TX-8242 sprinted along the sub-maintenance corridor in the opposite direction. The narrow passage twisted through the bows of the destroyer. Pipes dripping with condensation ran along the ceiling, like veins in a dying corpse. Shadows shifted and stretched as the horde pursued him, the echo of their hurried steps drumming out of time, like a crowd running before they learn to walk. Deafening screams bounced off the walls, a chorus of starved animals working together to hunt prey. The trooper glanced back. A tidal wave of rotting flesh clawing the durasteel walls and floor. Glowing eyes stared through the shattered visors of trooper helmets, torn officer uniforms releasing entrails to swing and drag along the floor. One was missing its jaw completely, tongue lolling below its neck. The horde picked up speed. The corridor opened up. TX-8242 found himself on the main maintenance concourse, Deck 22. Turbo lift Bank 4 sat in complete darkness, control panel dead. Priority Alpha lockdown in effect. The screams behind were drawing closer. His gaze drifted to the rungs of manual ladder 44C and the vertical shaft stretching up into the dark well above. To get to the auxiliary launch bay, he needed to get to Deck 18.
This is the way.
The first yellow glowing eyes entered the main maintenance concourse behind him. Their screams intensified, creating a cascading chorus of terror echoing through the horde. The trooper grabbed the first rung of the ladder. Training took over. 3 points of contact for efficient movement. Screaming carried from beneath. The trooper looked down to see the dead clawing over one another to reach the ladder. Broken limbs hooked around the rungs as bones snapped with wet crunches. Intestines looped and swung from the busted abdomen of the first corpse to start its climb. Its scorched white Stormtrooper armour fused in sections to rotten flesh. TX-8242 aimed his E11 down at the set of hungry yellow eyes staring up at him through the shattered visor. A violent flash of red lit up the shaft. The shot sheared away the helmet of the corpse and the left side of its head, in an explosion of blood and burning bone. A smell of cooked flesh and ozone fought through TX-8242's damaged helmet filter. The corpse jerked violently with the force of the blast, but its dead fingers remained curled around the rungs of the ladder. What remained of its jaw curled into a half grin. Its remaining yellow eye focused on him, and the thing kept climbing. More were grabbing the rungs below, climbing toward him, reaching. Screams of excitement and frustration were deafening now. Beneath it all, a sea of glowing yellow eyes, all staring up. TX-8242 fired again and again. Bodies tumbled from the ladder to a sea of the dead below. Each that fell, instantly replaced by another. A column of rotten flesh ascending toward him. He climbed faster now. Efficiency and discipline be damned. The muscles in his arms ached in protest as he hauled himself rung after rung. Hatch markers passed by as the dead gained ground. Dead fingers curled around TX-8242's boot. He kicked violently, sending the corpse tumbling down the shaft, a mess of teeth and bone. The body landed among the sea of reaching hands. He reached for his utility belt and clutched one of the two smooth grey spheres.
Make it count.
The light of the thermal detonator blinked beneath his thumb. The horde shrieked as one, as if their glowing eyes recognised what was coming. TX-8242 let go of the detonator and watched it disappear into the mass of rotten bodies. He hooked his elbows around the rungs of the ladder and pressed against the shaft wall. The explosion erupted with the force of a Tatooine sandstorm, causing the entire shaft to sway and convulse with the blast. Heat blasted with the force of a Star Destroyer's thruster, sending body parts and armour fragments upward. The ladder shook with enough violence to almost throw TX-8242 off the rungs, but his elbows held firm. Ringing flooded his ears, followed by silence. Smoke rolled through the shaft in waves. He coughed as his broken helmet filter fought a losing battle to keep his air clear. Warning symbols flashed across his visor, informing him that the blast had compromised the filters even further than before. As the smoke thinned, he saw it. Glowing yellow eyes at the bottom of the shaft, crawling over the chaotic wreckage to reach the lower rungs of the ladder. Some were burning, others missing limbs and sections of their bodies, but none of them stopped. TX-8242 forced his eyes upward, and climbed. His hands were numb inside his gloves by the time he reached the hatch for Deck 18. Enlisted Crew Block 11, printed in white lettering above. He slammed his fist against the emergency release. The hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss and he fell through, landing on the deck plating. TX-8242 aimed his blaster and scanned the dark silence around him. Endless rows of enlisted crew quarters stretched beyond what dim light remained. Personal lockers hung open. Smears of blood painted the walls and floors. From the hatch behind came the screams and the metal click of climbing limbs on rungs. He pulled the fusion cutter from his belt. It ignited with an intense flare. He closed the hatch and pressed it against the seam. Molten sparks sprayed across the deck as the intense heat caused the seam to glow beneath the cutter's flame. Banging fists slammed against the hatch before he finished. Metal buckled beneath the pounding and scratching. Screams cut through the unwelded section of the seam. Once complete, TX-8242 stepped back and slumped against the wall beside the hatch. The pounding continued, one hit after another, but the world was holding for now. The warning inside his helmet continued to flash. O2, 16%.
Log, TX-8242. Vital signs. Heart rate 145 BPM. Respiratory distress detected. Internal O2 16%. With carbon dioxide levels in excess of safety parameters. Filter 4A. Failure. I've reached enlisted crew block 11, deck 18. Sealed the hatch to ladder 44C behind me. The shaft is full of them. Hostiles responsible for the death of the rest of the team. I dropped a thermal detonator into the shaft behind me to create time. It barely slowed them down. No amount of blaster fire or damage to the bodies slows them down. I know now. It's the crew of the destroyer. Death came here for them all, but they kept moving. Even now, I hear them beating against the sealed hatch, desperate to reach me. They know I'm the last one left alive here. If I pass out from CO2 before I reach the auxiliary launch bay, or worse. Log this as a code 1090. No survivors. Do not board this destroyer. Burn it. Log end.
TX-8242 leaned back and closed his eyes. The vibrations of the pounding fists against the hatch and the smell of ozone from his blaster sent his mind drifting. The vibrations morphed into artillery fire, and he remembered the battle on Mimban and the Schrieber trenches that tried to kill him. Keep them pinned down! The ignition of swamp gas collapsed the line. TX-8242 pushed the dead troopers off his body. He was alone in the foxhole, his filters full of mud. His E11 was useless, completely jammed. Screams of agony echoed around him in the fog. Mimbanese hostiles were rushing toward his foxhole. TX-8242 gripped the trench shovel, watching the insurgents close in through the fog. In the dead fingers of the trooper beside him, a thermal detonator. He pulled it free and let it fly. Two of the Mimbanese flew in the blast, landing dead in the mud. The last reached the foxhole, blaster raised. TX-8242 dragged the insurgent into the foxhole by the leg and brought the end of the shovel down with a crack into the insurgent's skull. The body twitched beneath him, then fell still. The rhythmic beating against the hatch brought his mind back to the destroyer. He opened his eyes.
You've been good as dead before.
TX-8242 picked his aching body up from the floor. He looked down the endless dark corridor of Crew Block 11 toward the distant emergency lights of the deck and the safety of Auxiliary Launch Base 6 Kappa. With his blaster raised, TX-8242 moved through enlisted Crew Block 11. Each empty bunk and overturned table smeared with dried blood. An attempt to barricade one of the transverse corridors with storage crates had been torn to pieces. Silence weighed heavily in the empty place once home to thousands. Every instinct told him the dead was still living here somewhere, watching him. For now, his only company was the distant groans of contracting metal deep within the destroyer. Flickering emergency lights bathed the quarters in flashes of red, transforming the walls of dried blood into a slaughterhouse. His visor flickered another warning. O2, 10%. Tightness built in his throat now. Every breath, a fight through a damp and hot failing filter. The corridor ahead split into a series of transverse and longitudinal arteries, all feeding toward Auxiliary Launch Base 6 Kappa. That's when TX-8242 heard the scream. It echoed along the arteries from somewhere up ahead. He aimed his blaster toward the darkness in front of him. The scream rose and fell, like the call of a single wild animal. A second scream answered it to his left. Then another from behind.
They're communicating.
That knowledge hit harder than any artillery. The dead were hunting him. Screaming erupted from behind him with renewed fury. They'd made it through the welded hatch. TX-8242 broke into a sprint. His boots pounded on the deck plating as screams echoed from every direction. Movement flashed on the passageway at the end of the next intersection. A cluster of yellow eyes sprinted toward him from the bulkhead opening. The dead still knew their destroyer, and they were hurting him. TX-8242 fired. It ripped through the nearest corpse. Chunks of its spine exploded from its back. The force of the blast sent it spinning. Those behind it simply climbed over and kept coming toward him, reaching. He kept running. Yellow eyes appeared around him. Deck 18 exploded to life. Grasping hands and rotten faces poured from vents and doorways. Screaming erupted behind sealed doors. He fired while running. The blaster fire offered glimpses of the dead's numbers. A corpse in the rotten shell of an officer's uniform lunged from a hatch. It wrapped its hands around TX-8242's throat. He slammed the butt of his blaster into the thing's face and blasted it from point-blank range. A spray of grey fluid landed on TX-8242's armour. The thing let go of him and collapsed to the floor. The corridor opened up into Auxiliary Launch Base 6 Kappa. Rows of escape pods lined the walls, locked into their magnetic cradles. The freedom and safety of space were only a wall away. The dead flooded the bay behind him, pouring in from every corridor and vent. They advanced slowly, their dead jaws locked in macabre grins. No more screams, just clicking jaws. Warnings flashed on his visor. O2, 4%. TX-8242 knew what needed to be done. He turned to the access bay console. He took a deep breath and initiated the emergency atmosphere vent. Air screamed from the destroyer as loose crates, tools, and the closest dead were sucked into space. TX-8242 scrambled into the nearest pod, Life Pod 22 Theta, and closed the hatch. He primed the repulsor lift toggle. The magnetic docking clamps groaned with a shudder as the pod released. TX-8242 waited. The destroyer's tractor beams were still operational. It would be a shame to get this far and simply be dragged back inside. He pulled the manual jettison lever, and the explosive bolts launched the pod. He looked back as his pod joined the rest of the floating debris and dead sucked from the auxiliary bay.
Come on.
He let out a jagged breath as he cleared the tractor beam's range with the rest of the debris. The dead were still watching him, clawing at his escape pod as they drifted through space. The warning flashed in his visor, O2, 0%. TX-8242 removed his helmet. The grey fluid on his chest plate crawled toward his face. TX-8242 wiped at it. It climbed over his fingers, searching for a way into his body. It clawed at his mouth, then slowed, then stopped completely. He wiped it away from his face. The bodies of the dead drifting in space stopped moving. Their eyes no longer glowed bright. Whatever this was, it couldn't survive away from the destroyer. TX-8242 took one final look at the Star Destroyer and the Purge sitting directly beneath it.